Hello, on behalf of ArtsEmerson, welcome to the post-film conversation for A Tale of Three Chinatowns at Rox Film, part of the Shared Stories film series, a collaboration with the Roxbury International Film Festival, the Boston Latino International Film Festival, and the Boston Asian American Film Festival. This film, along with A Reckoning in Boston, has been specially curated as a presentation of both Shared Stories and Roxbury International Film Festival. Both films share very similar experiences in reflecting current research on Boston's housing experiences in neighborhoods. The two films also recognize and illuminates the vision of Shared Stories, this film series, which we were actually closing this June. It illustrates how we all have same but different experiences in neighborhoods in Boston, right here, side by side with one another. I'm so excited to be presenting A Tale of Three Chinatowns today, as I recall actually getting an opportunity to meet the producers early on in the first days of it, prior to the film actually coming into fruition. So to see it come full circle is so exciting to be able to have this opportunity to talk about the important conversations today. I am Susan Chinson, a creative producer at ArtsEmerson and the founding director of the Boston Asian American Film Festival, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. And I am pleased to welcome the filmmakers and advisors to our conversation. First today, we have director and executive producer and writer, Lisa Mao. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for having us.
Next, we have Penny Lee, executive producer and editor.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Penny. So good to see you. I still remember that time when I was at the Chinese Historical Society getting the call from you.
Yes.
And next, and certainly not last, is Andrew Leung, advisor and professor at UMass Boston. Hi, Andrew.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So exciting to have all of you here today, and hoping we can have a conversation that will share with the audiences a little bit more behind the scenes and sort of how this all came together, and really looking at some of the angles that Boston is really bringing to the table, and sort of why Boston is such a big part of the story. I feel like even though as much as I have done research and information and knowledge about Chinatown and Chinatowns even across the country, I'm curious to know more about personally, we could start off with knowing more about your perspective and how you're coming to the story, and sort of what are your personal connections to Chinatown, any of the Chinatowns, all three of them, whatever it may be. But I'd love to hear, and if you'd share with people your connections to Chinatown.
Well, I guess I can start. So I grew up hanging around DC Chinatown when I was a child. And so over the years, I probably know a lot of the people that live there. My husband came and was born from Chinatown. So it's kind of like a family. Chinatown, DC is very small. And so over the years, as I'm watching it kind of get smaller and smaller, it concerns me. And every time my friends get together in DC, old friends, ones that move away, we always talk about memories of what it was once like. And so part of that reason of the stories that we keep going around circles talking about have kind of compelled me to do something about it. My career is really in editing and post-production. So I've been editing for over 25 years. And I didn't really put on my producer's hat until probably 8 years ago, when Lisa and I worked on another short film called Through Chinatown's Eyes, April 1968. And that is about DC Chinatowns and what happened after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how DC Chinatowns and the residents there were affected by that experience. It's available on Amazon Prime Video. And so after that film was made and we had screenings and people were asking us what we were going to do next, that's how Lisa's field production experience with my post-production experience, we thought we could team up together, and we formed Tiger Sisters Production to make A Tale of Three Chinatowns.
Great. And Lisa, how about yourself? Your connections to Chinatown?
So Penny kind of answered part of that. So I am Chinese American, but my connection to Chinatown is different. Um, my connection to Chinatown was going to Chinatown in New York City with my parents when we'd go to New York to go, visit just as tourists. But we would always hit the New York City Chinatown. It had the best food, best pastries. So for me as a kid growing up, I did not really grow up in Chinatown. I didn't have any family there. And my parents didn't really have friends there, but it was always sort of a cultural touchstone of sorts. Where are we going to, again, get the best food? It was going to likely be in Chinatown. I grew up outside of DC, but DC's Chinatown, maybe I had been to a handful of times as a kid. And part of that has to do with the history of Chinatown. My parents came over in the 60s. Their immigrant story is different than, historically the story of those who went through Chinatown. And so for me, when Penny and I met several years ago to work on Through Chinatown's Eyes, April 1968, it really gave me the opportunity to learn more about Chinatown. Because for me, my parents, mostly my dad's from Shanghai, my mom is from Wuhan, which everyone knows what Wuhan is and where Wuhan is now. But basically their history was a very different pathway into this country. So for me, learning about Chinatown or working on these films was really eye-opening. I majored in history, I have a master's in history, and I had never really studied this particular area. So again, it just was very, it was really awesome to learn more about Chinatown. And these films, working on both of these films really, really helped me do that. So my connection to Chinatown is really more as, as a Chinese American looking at Chinatown as a cultural touchstone. And really, it's New York City, it's Boston, it's DC, it's Chicago, San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco for many years. When I went to London, I went to the London Chinatown. Same thing with Paris. Have to check out the Chinatowns everywhere. Again, because it is that sort of, cultural touchstone for me as a Asian American.
Great. No, that definitely that Chinese diaspora really goes anywhere and everywhere. And Andrew, and yourself.
Yeah. So I mean, what Lisa spoke about, when she travels is exactly, I think the kind of, same stories that we all have. I mean, for me, I had much more of the classical historical version of a Chinatown experience where I had immigrated in the late 60s. And we were living right on Wentworth in Chicago Chinatown in my grandfather's store, where he had a dry cleaner up front and a tofu factory in the back. It was the only, the first tofu factory in Chicago Chinatown. And so that was kind of like, my experience. And he was a great leader within the China Merchants Association in Chicago. And so it felt like headquarters. It felt like a community center because people were coming in and out, strategizing, talking, smoking, drinking. And we were always going out to dinner or just having dinner with all sorts of various different people. And so that was kind of my memory when I grew up before leaving in Chicago Chinatown and moving elsewhere in the Midwest. And I didn't really return to Chinatown until I came to Boston for law school. And fortunate for me, during my law school experience, we had a what we call a Chinatown clinical program at Boston College Law School that allowed law students to work in Boston Chinatown, where we were out of the South Cove Community Health Center. And so that was kind of like my second real interaction with Chinatown. And since that point in time, I had just made it part of my professional life, by working within legal services there, where I would be, have all my clients there in Chinatown, and then, growing into the Vietnamese community and elsewhere. And I really never left, since it became a part of my advocacy and research agenda as well.
No, and I feel like Boston definitely claims you as one of our advocates and spokespeople. So I definitely feel like people come to you in terms of getting the pulse of what's going on. And I think it's fabulous that you're the advisor for this storyline. And I'm actually curious in terms of that storyline, the choice in focusing on these three between DC, Chicago, and Boston. Sort of how did that narrative and storyline come through?
I think beginning we were just going to do DC, but after thinking about it, and Lisa has convinced me we need to do more and maybe have a comparison contrast thing going. Lisa, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, Susan. Oh, am I? Okay, yeah. And, basically, after doing Through Chinatown's Eyes, April 1968, there was sort of hints of gentrification that were going to follow that film. And so people would ask us, hey, what are we doing next after this film? And we felt like, okay, well, to look at the changes of Chinatown over the last 30 years would really be the next chapter. But in looking at that, it really seemed like, we can't really look at this in a total vacuum. Let's see what's going on elsewhere. Because as we were doing research, it seemed like Chinatowns were shrinking all over the place. And so as we started digging, and thinking about going broader, this idea of looking at three Chinatowns came up. In my career, I work in development, and titles are always like a thing. And so just A Tale of Three Chinatowns came up to me, it came to me, I thought, okay, we can let's try to compare and contrast three, right? Three is always a nice number. And we talked about it, and, through initial research, Boston was on the list, Chicago was on the list, San Francisco was on the list, LA was on the list. I mean, there were other cities that we could look at. I mean, New York City, I mean, there's so many cities, right? But I think that for us, DC made sense because of our personal connection and the connection to the last film. And also just to see where DC's Chinatown has gone, what it has turned into. And then Chicago made sense too, because it was the one that was growing. I mean, how remarkable that it's grown over the last 100 years. And then the one that was kind of in the middle where, there was a struggle of sorts, where is their activism happening? We had a few choices, to be honest with you. And we thought about San Francisco. Of course, it's the oldest Chinatown in the United States. It's the one that everyone knows. And, they have a wonderful story too. But we felt like, Boston has unique forces as well. I mean, it's not just residential development, it's also commercial development, it's also institutional development. And you also have the state owns property there as well. It's very interesting. And it's also one of the longest, standing Chinatowns in the country. And there's a lot of activism. So, in looking at all the different choices, Boston just, it made a lot of sense. So that's how we came up across those three.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think I was really struck by, there's so much research and films and storylines about specifically, San Francisco, New York, and LA, and the fact that this has had quite a bit of more of an East Coast kind of feel to it, and did look at Boston's. I think adds so much more to the canon of what's happening out there. I think in this time now where we're looking at the need for more ethnic studies and Asian American studies and knowing our own history, for Asian Americans to be able to have access to this film coming out now, is like fantastic. I'm very excited about that. So I'll stop going on that part. But maybe if you would share a bit more too, Andrew, I'm curious to hear from your perspective, especially being based here in Boston. What are some of the themes that you are really hoping people were getting from the film, sort of like what were, as the advisor, like what were sort of the through lines that you were trying to really help Penny and Lisa sort of like push through?
Yeah, I mean, before I answer, your question, your immediate question there, I just want to provide some background because, when Penny and Lisa approached me, this is what, 3 maybe years ago?
3 years ago.
I had just co-author finished a Three Chinatown gentrification study in November of 2013, with the lead author being Bethany Lee, as well as other contributors from UPenn. And the report was, coming out of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund in New York City, where we studied the gentrification impacts of Boston, Philly, and New York, because these were the kind of Chinatowns that we all had worked with, and knew people, knew the activists. And so, it's just so happened that, when Lisa and Penny approached me, I said, hey, how about, 3 Chinatowns, right? That sounds good. So I don't know whether, we had a similar theme or not, right? But what we saw coming across the country was, in fact, a lot of the huge waves of gentrification that was happening in the kind of, smaller to mid-size Chinatowns, throughout the West Coast, in Seattle, in Portland, Vancouver, even, Canada. And but what we didn't hear about was much more the exception, which was Chicago, because of the availability of land, and as well as the common factors that Chicago Chinatown had also with most other Chinatowns, which is accessibility in public transportation, subway, as well as proximity to a highway. But it had tremendous growth opportunities, because it's a nice area with waterfront property, and we saw things that was developing and happening in Chicago, like the public library and a park. These are all things that we were all lusting after in most other Chinatowns, right? And that was the kind of special factor that we had about bringing in Chinatown. And bringing in DC was kind of like trying to make sure that we unfortunately don't experience the loss of a Chinatown in DC. But when we're talking about Chinatowns in all these multiple cities, we really are talking about the same type of issues, not just about Chinatowns, but about all communities everywhere. And when I say everywhere, it's not just about the United States, but it's about, across the world, the impacts of gentrification, how, corporatization has really taken over, where the government has really become, city halls have really become agents, if you would, to gentrification, and allowing the various different corporations and developers to just, take control of public land and build as high as they want to. And so these are the same issues that resonate, whether it's, Roxbury, Dorchester, East Boston, or Boston Chinatown. So the lessons of how we survive, how we struggle, how we become activists or become activated in the struggle, it really needs to be heard and to be learned and applied in multiple cities.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And just to add to that, Andrew, what Andrew just said, I mean, I remember early on in our conversations when things were still ideating, here, we were trying to figure out which cities, Andrew was the first person to call DC's Chinatown a dead Chinatown. I mean, it's okay. It's okay, Andrew. It's okay.
Disneyified was, I remember the term coined.
It's just such a good way to kind of label it, right? And then in thinking about the title, A Tale of Three Chinatowns, it's pulled from Dickens, right? A Tale of Two Cities. When you think about Dickens and, oh my God, I can't think right now. A Christmas Carol. Help me out. Yeah, Dickens, thank you. The other story of his, really looking at the three, in my mind, I thought, okay, it's like the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future, right? So like the ghost of Christmas past, happy, 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 is like Chicago. Ghost of Christmas present is the struggle, the current struggle that one Chinatown is going through, Boston. And then ghost of Christmas future, sadness, Scrooge in the ground, is like DC. So I really, in my mind, just as a creative, I really wanted to show those comparisons and those contrasts.
No,
And I
that
think
definitely came through. Yeah.
yeah, I think there's also lessons learned that, you know, in our film, all the three Chinatowns, like Lisa said, it could happen in any Chinatown throughout the nations. So, you know, lessons learned between each cities is important.
What not to do, what to do.
Let's be clear about that. Yeah, what not to do, what to do. And I think that was something that was really a great contrast that definitely came through in terms of like this idea of like, if you can imagine sort of the past, present, future of a potential Chinatown, it's like once you know that that's the opportunity, that's sort of the vertex in which you're kind of like balancing on which way is it going to tip. And for myself, it's like, what is the role, you know, that us as citizens have in helping to impact or affect that change, which actually in many ways I feel like, you know, for the other film that's sort of being shared in shared stories through Roxbury Film right now is A Reckoning in Boston, which profiles Roxbury, also resonated so much. Like, for personally just watching both of the films together, it was so clear to me how these two neighborhoods had sort of the same but different experiences. The idea of gentrification impacting a neighborhood of color, and sort of like the different types of relationships that, you know, or that exist within each that have enabled things to happen or not happen, was just really incredible. Would you share maybe any thoughts that you might have in terms of how you think people, especially here in Boston, can kind of take away from the film in terms of like how could they become involved? What you know, there seem to be so many fantastic voices of people who are doing such great work. You know, you've got such a wide variety of, you know, people from Polly to Lydia to, you know, expressing, you know, actions that they are personally have been taking. The addition of, you know, the Power Center being a resource to the community now. You know, do you have any advice or ideas in which people who may be new to hearing about, you know, the struggles of Chinatown can be involved with?
Well, I think it's not just really about, you know, the struggle of Chinatown, but it's the struggle of all communities and all neighborhoods, right? So that's one of the kind of key lessons that we learn. And in fact, one of the great leaders that we have in the city of Boston, you know, Mel King, one of, you know, he had always said, you know, as a leader in you know, not just in Boston, but within the African American community, he always said that, you know, Black community learned from the Chinatown community in Boston about what we did, you know, with the city of Boston in coming to having memorandum of agreements between quote unquote Chinatown and, you know, the city of Boston. And so that's what, you know, Roxbury and others began to replicate, right? That, you know, in order for us to conduct master planning processes and not just have City Hall, not just have developers run roughshod over us, okay? We need to make sure that our communities survive, that we as community residents have some sort of a vision as to our future. Because otherwise, you know, it is just basically land banking for all developers to come in whenever they want to, whenever they see that our land, our community is valuable enough for them to put in a Starbucks, to put in a high-rise luxury condo. And so those are all the things that, you know, we can all learn from each other, right? And as well as to make sure that, you know, what we're seeing right now is much more communities working together. And so when you're talking about, for instance, you know, the eviction freeze that came out of COVID, right? It's not just about, you know, just the Black community advocating at the State House, right? But we see, you know, Black folks with, you know, Chinatown folks, with, you know, Latino folks from Chelsea, everywhere, because these are all issues that really resonate, you know, for all of the futures of all these particular communities. And it should, obviously, it's not just about the city of Boston, but it's about everywhere as well that's being gentrified.
Yeah,
It feels like a good microcosm of sort of an analogy that many can experience. Lisa, I'll let you speak.
Oh yeah, no. And I mean, and I would say that in making this film, and obviously neighborhoods or cities, it's not, we can't compare apples to apples, right? I mean, it's there, each place has its own nuance, and there are different groups and whatnot, timing, all this stuff. And I would say that one thing that came up in our interview with Lydia Lowe is it's about making housing affordable for everyone, whether, you're Asian American or Latino, African American, whatever group, working class. I mean, it's really to make the city available to all. That was one of the major questions that came up. Are cities only for the wealthy? And what's up with that? So, it's really looking at it also just from a broader socioeconomic perspective.
Yeah, and that was one of the main things that came out of the DC part of the film, right? Where residents, said, they walked around and said, it was the light bulb moment, right? This is no longer Chinatown. Why? I could see it, I could see the changes happening. And so it resonated back to, who is this community for? And what rights do past and present residents have, to be here for the future?
That's great. Well, I'd love for you to, we're almost out of time, but if you could actually maybe share, Lisa and Penny, how sort of where the film is in terms of its release and sort of the future plans that you have for it and how people can continue to follow the progress it's making.
Yeah, so right now we're doing the film festival circuit, and we have submitted our film to other festivals as well. So we're hearing back, and it's going to be probably throughout this year. We're going to go through that circuit. And meanwhile, we're going to be making our film available if organizations or educational institutions or any
the Oscars.
So we have a form on our website, 3Chinatowns.com, that people can go to and send us a message, and we'll be happy to have a screening for your organization, company, or educational institution.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely check out our website, 3Chinatowns.com. There is a section, as Penny mentioned, where it does have up-to-date screening information. So obviously, Rock's film is in there, and we will keep adding additional screenings as they come up. We are looking for and speaking with different outlets for distribution. And then, as Penny mentioned, yes, there are, you can reach out to us if you wanted to host a private screening.
Fantastic. It's so exciting to see this. Congratulations on getting it to this stage. It really feels like, I know, Lisa, you just recently gave birth, but I feel like this is almost like having twins you're trying to go through right now. So thank you for joining us today. Really excited to have all of you here, and certainly looking forward to sort of what comes out of this. I feel like this really has inspired, at least for me, thinking more about sort of the commonalities that I'm seeing within the different neighborhoods here in Boston, and this idea of, that there is this long history of allyship between Black and Asian communities, and how do we continue to develop and foster those, because a lot of the themes that you shared in A Tale of Three Chinatowns, I also saw resonating in A Reckoning in Boston, and just feeling a very much an overwhelming understanding of okay, there are things at play here that are affecting both of our communities, and it was just very eye-opening. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and the timing of it is fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan and Ellen and the film festival.
Yeah, Roxbury Film, thank you for helping to co-host this with us at ArtsEmerson for Shared Stories. Thank you so much, Penny, Lisa, and Andrew, for joining us today and sharing much more about your perspective and thoughts about actually the behind the scenes of the film. Shared Stories is happening through this coming Sunday evening, and folks are able to watch the film along with a recording of this conversation at ArtsEmerson.org as a part of Rock's Film. And be sure to check out Roxbury Film Festival at roxfilmfest.org for the full festival lineup, including A Reckoning in Boston, which runs through Saturday the 26th. Thank you again all for joining us, and hope you see us again soon.